The thunder cracked like a whip against the vast Wyoming sky as Fiona James stumbled through the downpour, her soaked calico dress clinging to her shivering frame. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving frontier had never seemed crueler than on this bitter October night when she found herself without a penny to her name or a roof over her head. The town of Silvercrest had made its judgment clear: a woman with no husband, no family, and accusations of theft hanging over her head was not welcome within its boundaries. Fiona's teeth chattered as she trudged along the muddy trail leading away from town. The rain pelted mercilessly against her face, washing away her tears, but not the sting of humiliation she'd endured when Sheriff Morris had dragged her to the edge of town and told her never to return. Her crime: being in the wrong place at the wrong time when Mrs. Holloway's silver brooch went missing. The wealthy woman had pointed her finger, and that was all it took. "I didn't take it," Fiona whispered to the howling wind, though no one was there to hear her defense. At 22, she had already weathered more storms than most orphaned at 16, working as a seamstress until the shop closed, then taking whatever odd job she could find. But nothing had prepared her for this. The muddy path disappeared beneath a torrent of water, and Fiona lost her footing. She tumbled down a small embankment, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. Through the curtain of rain, she spotted what looked like a dilapidated barn in the distance. With renewed determination, she limped toward it, praying it would offer some shelter from the relentless storm. The barn door was heavy, but desperation gave her strength. Inside, the air was musty but dry. Fiona collapsed onto a pile of hay, exhaustion overwhelming her. The sound of the rain hammering against the roof was oddly comforting as her eyelids grew heavy. She didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats or the creak of the door as it opened once more. "Well, what do we have here?" The deep voice startled Fiona awake. She scrambled backward, her heart pounding wildly in her chest as she stared up at the tall figure silhouetted in the doorway. Lightning flashed, illuminating a man's face, rugged, weather-beaten, with piercing eyes that assessed her with cool detachment. "I'm sorry," she stammered, rising to her feet despite the pain in her ankle. "I didn't know this belonged to anyone. I just needed shelter from the storm." The man stepped fully into the barn, water dripping from his long duster coat and wide-brimmed hat. He was broad-shouldered and moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to handling himself in difficult situations. Behind him, a magnificent black horse snorted and pawed at the ground. "This is my land," he said simply, his voice neither angry nor particularly welcoming. "Where'd you come from, Silvercrest?" Fiona admitted, clutching her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how her wet dress revealed more than was proper. "I was asked to leave." The man's eyes narrowed. "Asked in this weather." He shook his head, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with rain. "Name's Quinn Novak. Most folks call me Quinn." "Fiona James," she replied, relieved he hadn't immediately thrown her back out into the storm. Quinn moved to his horse, removing the saddle with practiced ease. "You hurt?" he asked, noticing her favoring one foot. "I fell. It's nothing serious," he grunted, unconvinced. After settling his horse, he approached Fiona, maintaining a respectful distance. "My ranch house is about a half-mile north. You can't stay here. Roof leaks something terrible. Can you ride?" Fiona hesitated, years of caution making her wary of a stranger's offer, but the alternative was a night in a leaking barn or worse back in the storm. "Yes, I can ride." Quinn nodded, then turned to ready his horse again. "Come on then, storm's getting worse." Moments later, Fiona found herself perched in front of Quinn on his horse, his arms around her as he held the reins. She was acutely aware of his chest against her back, solid and warm despite his wet clothing. They rode in silence through the downpour, the darkness broken occasionally by flashes of lightning that revealed glimpses of open range and scattered trees. The ranch house appeared suddenly, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and light glowing from within. As they approached, the front door opened and an older woman with silver-streaked hair hurried out, a lantern in hand. "Quinn, I was getting worried with this storm." She stopped short at the sight of Fiona. "Who's this?" Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Fiona down. "Found her in the old Morgan barn, Martha. She soaked through and hurt her ankle." Martha's expression softened with concern. "Well, get her inside before you both catch your death." Quinn handed the reins to a young stable hand who had appeared from a nearby barn, then turned to Fiona. Before she could protest, he'd swept her into his arms and carried her up the porch steps. "I can walk," she objected weakly. "Not on that ankle, you can't," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Quinn set Fiona down gently on a chair near the fire. Martha bustled about, bringing towels and disappearing upstairs to fetch dry clothes. "Why was Silvercrest so eager to be rid of you in weather like this?" Quinn asked, removing his wet coat and hanging it by the door. Fiona's cheeks burned with shame. "Mrs. Holloway accused me of stealing her silver brooch. I didn't take it, but no one believed me." Amelia Holloway. Quinn's expression darkened. That woman would accuse the preacher of theft if she misplaced her Bible. Martha returned with a simple cotton dress and woolen stockings. "These should fit well enough. Come, dear, let's get you changed in the spare room, then I'll have a look at that ankle." Fiona followed Martha upstairs, grateful for the woman's kindness. The spare room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. As she changed into the dry clothes, Fiona couldn't help but wonder about Quinn Novak. There was something in his eyes, a hardness, yes, but also something else. Something that made her both nervous and curious. When she returned downstairs, her ankle wrapped in a bandage by Martha's capable hands, she found Quinn seated at a large wooden table, a steaming cup of coffee before him. He rose when she entered, a gesture of politeness she hadn't expected. "Feel better?" he asked. "Much, thank you. Both of you have been very kind, but I shouldn't impose. Once the storm passes, you'll stay," Quinn said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "At least until that ankle heals." Martha placed a bowl of stew in front of Fiona. "Eat up, dear, you look half-starved." As Fiona ate, Quinn watched her with those intense eyes. "Martha," he said after a while, his gaze never leaving Fiona, "tell Wilkins and the boys that Miss James will be staying with us for a while." Martha nodded, a knowing look passing between her and Quinn that Fiona couldn't interpret. "And if anyone from Silvercrest comes looking for her," Quinn added, his voice dropping to a dangerous timbre, "tell them she's mine." Fiona nearly choked on her stew. "Mr. Novak, I'm not what they think you are," he finished for her. "I know. But around these parts, my name carries weight. If word gets out that you're under my protection, no one from Silvercrest will bother you." Fiona wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or alarmed by his declaration. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Quinn's expression softened slightly. "Let's just say I've got no love for the self-righteous folk of Silvercrest, especially the Holloways." Later that night, as Fiona lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the storm rage outside, she tried to make sense of the day's events. How had she gone from being cast out of town to being claimed by a man she'd just met? And why did the memory of Quinn's arms around her as they rode through the rain make her heart beat faster? Sleep claimed her eventually, but her dreams were filled with piercing eyes and the echo of a deep voice saying, "She's mine." The morning light filtered through the simple curtains, rousing Fiona from a deeper sleep than she'd known in weeks. For a moment, disorientation gripped her as she took in the unfamiliar room, the sturdy wooden furniture, the braided rug on the floor, the patchwork quilt covering her. Then yesterday's events rushed back. The accusation, the exile, the storm, and Quinn Novak. She sat up slowly, testing her ankle. It was tender but less painful than the night before. Martha's ministrations had helped. Fiona found a basin of fresh water on the dresser and quickly washed her face, then combed her fingers through her long auburn hair, wishing for a proper brush. Her own clothes had been washed and dried overnight, folded neatly on a chair. She changed quickly, grateful to be in her own things again, modest though they were. Downstairs, the house was alive with activity. Martha was at the stove frying bacon and eggs. Two ranch hands sat at the table, deep in conversation about a broken fence line. They fell silent when Fiona appeared, both men rising to their feet with awkward politeness. "Good morning, Miss James," Martha said warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I expected, thank you." Fiona glanced around. "Is Mr. Novak?" "Been up since before dawn," one of the ranch hands offered. "Boss is always first out, last in." Martha set a plate of food in front of an empty chair. "Sit and eat, dear, you need your strength." The two ranch hands introduced themselves as Jim Wilkins, the foreman, and young Thomas, barely 18 and new to ranch work. They were polite but curious, clearly wondering about Fiona's presence but too well-mannered to ask directly. "The boss said you had trouble in Silvercrest," Wilkins finally ventured. "That town's got more gossip than cattle." Fiona picked at her food. "I was accused of something I didn't do," Wilkins nodded sagely. "Figures." "Quinn, Mr. Novak, he's got no love for that town, especially after what happened with his brother." Martha shot Wilkins a warning look. "That's not our story to tell, Jim." Fiona's curiosity was piqued, but she knew better than to pry. Whatever had happened between Quinn and Silvercrest was clearly a sensitive subject. After breakfast, despite Martha's protests that she should rest her ankle, Fiona insisted on helping with household chores. She found comfort in the familiar tasks of washing dishes and sweeping floors. Through the window, she could see men working with cattle in a distant corral, and wondered which one was Quinn. Her question was answered mid-morning when the back door swung open, and Quinn strode in, removing his hat as he entered. He looked different in daylight, still imposing but less mysterious. His features were strong, a straight nose, firm jawline dusted with stubble, and those eyes a startling shade of blue that reminded Fiona of the sky after a storm. "Miss James," he acknowledged with a nod. "Ankle better?" "Yes, thank you, and please call me Fiona." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fiona, then." He accepted a cup of coffee from Martha. "I've sent word to some contacts in Silvercrest, hoping to get to the bottom of this theft accusation." Fiona's heart sank. "Please don't trouble yourself." "I doubt it will change anything." Quinn studied her over the rim of his cup. "Maybe not for them, but it might for you." He set the cup down. "In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here as long as needed." "I can't impose indefinitely." "Perhaps there's work in the next town. Nearest town is Coopersville, 20 miles west," Quinn interrupted. "And they take their cues from Silvercrest when it comes to strangers." He hesitated, then added, "We could use help here if you're willing." "Martha's not as young as she used to be, and the house is too much for her alone." Martha huffed. "I manage just fine, Quinn Novak." "You do more than manage, Martha," he said with affection, "but an extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt." Fiona felt a surge of relief. Work meant purpose, and purpose meant dignity. "I'd be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Novak." "Quinn," he corrected. "If you're going to be living under my roof, we might as well use our given names." Over the next few days, Fiona settled into life at the Novak Ranch. She learned that Quinn had inherited the property from his father 5 years earlier and had expanded it considerably through hard work and shrewd business sense. The ranch employed a dozen men, most of whom lived in a bunkhouse near the main barn. Martha, she discovered, had been the Novak family housekeeper since Quinn was a boy. Fiona's ankle healed quickly, and she took on more responsibilities around the house. She found she enjoyed the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings, the simple but hearty meals, the satisfaction of work well done. Quinn was often absent during the day, overseeing various aspects of the ranch operation, but they would meet at dinner, where conversation gradually became less strained. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Fiona was mending a shirt on the front porch when Quinn joined her. He sat in the adjacent rocking chair, offering her a mug of coffee. "Thank you," she said, setting aside her sewing to accept the warm drink. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The October air was crisp but not yet bitter with winter's approach. "You're good with a needle," Quinn observed, nodding toward the nearly invisible repair she'd made to his shirt. "I was a seamstress for several years in Silvercrest, before that in Denver." "What brought you west from Denver?" Fiona hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing her story. "My parents died of influenza when I was 16. I had an aunt in Silvercrest who took me in, but she passed 2 years later. I stayed because I had work and nowhere else to go. Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. Family's important out here. Without it, the world can be a cold place. You have family beyond the ranch, Fiona asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. Forgive me, that's none of my business. No, it's a fair question. Quinn's expression grew distant. Had a brother, Caleb. Died 3 years ago. His jaw tightened. In Silvercrest, Fiona remembered Wilkins's comment about Quinn having no love for the town. I'm sorry, she said softly. Quinn seemed about to say more but instead stood abruptly. Getting chilly, better head in. That night, Fiona lay awake thinking about Quinn. There was a darkness in him, a wound that hadn't healed. Whatever had happened to his brother in Silvercrest had left scars deeper than any physical injury. Yet despite this, or perhaps because of it, he'd taken her in a stranger accused by the very town he despised. 2 weeks passed, and Fiona found herself settling into a comfortable routine at the Novak ranch. The initial awkwardness had faded, replaced by a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before her parents died. Martha had become like a mother figure, teaching Fiona the specific ways Quinn preferred things done around the house and sharing stories of when he was a boy. Always so serious, even as a child, Martha told her one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough together. His father was hard on him, expected perfection, but he was kind, always kind, especially to his mother before she passed. Fiona tried to imagine Quinn as a boy, those intense blue eyes set in a younger face. What was his brother like? Martha's hands stilled for a moment. Caleb was his opposite in many ways, charming, quick to laugh, bit of a dreamer. Quinn adored him, though he'd never admit it. Tried to protect him from their father's criticism. What happened to him? Fiona asked gently. Martha sighed, returning to her kneading. That's Quinn's story to tell if he chooses. Just know it changed him, made him harder, more closed off. She glanced at Fiona with knowing eyes. Until recently, that is. Before Fiona could ask what she meant, the back door opened and Quinn entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He paused, taking in the domestic scene before him with an unreadable expression. Smells good in here, he commented, washing his hands at the sink. Fiona's making her mother's bread recipe, Martha said. Girls got talent in the kitchen. Quinn's eyes met Fiona's, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that made her cheeks warm. Looking forward to trying it, he said, his voice lower than usual. That evening after dinner, Quinn asked Fiona to join him in his study. It was a room she'd cleaned but never lingered in, a masculine space with bookshelves lining the walls, a large desk, and a leather chair that bore the imprint of its owner. I received word from Silvercrest today, Quinn said, closing the door behind them. About the brooch. Fiona's heart raced. And it was found yesterday behind a dresser in Amelia Holloway's bedroom, apparently fell when she was changing clothes. His expression was grim. She's not admitting she was wrong about you, of course. Relief washed over Fiona, followed quickly by anger. So that's it. She accuses me, ruins my reputation, gets me thrown out of town, and faces no consequences. Quinn moved to a cabinet and withdrew a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. Welcome to Frontier Justice. He poured a small amount in each glass and offered one to Fiona. The good news is you're officially cleared of wrongdoing. Fiona accepted the glass but didn't drink. Does it matter? The damage is done. It matters to me, Quinn said quietly, and it should matter to you. Truth has value even when it comes too late. She took a small sip of the whiskey, wincing at the burn. Thank you for looking into it. You didn't have to. I know what it's like to have Silvercrest turn against you. Quinn drained his glass and set it down with a decisive thunk. So, now that your name's cleared, what will you do? The question caught Fiona off guard. She hadn't allowed herself to think beyond day-to-day survival. I don't know. I suppose I could try finding work in another town. Quinn moved to the window, his back to her. Or you could stay. The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning Fiona wasn't sure she understood. As your housekeeper, you mean? Quinn turned, his expression serious. As whatever you want to be, Fiona. Her pulse quickened at the implication in his words. Was he offering her a position or something more? Before she could form a response, a commotion outside drew their attention. Quinn moved swiftly to the window. "Riders coming," he said, his voice suddenly tense. "4 of them." He strode from the study, Fiona following close behind. By the time they reached the front porch, the riders were dismounting in the yard. Fiona's blood ran cold as she recognized Sheriff Morris from Silvercrest, along with his deputy and 2 men she didn't know. Quinn positioned himself slightly in front of Fiona, his stance protective. "Sheriff," he said coldly, "what brings you to my property at this hour?" Sheriff Morris removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Fiona. "So the rumors are true, you're harboring the James woman." "Miss James is my guest," Quinn replied, his tone dangerous. "And as I'm sure you've heard by now, she's been cleared of any wrongdoing in the matter of Mrs. Holloway's brooch." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "That's not why we're here, Novak. There's been another theft in town. General's store was robbed 3 nights ago, money and valuables taken." Fiona stepped forward, outraged. "And you think I did it?" "I've been here for nearly 3 weeks. Convenient alibi," the deputy sneered. "But we've got a witness who says they saw a woman matching your description riding away from town that night." Quinn's hand moved subtly toward the gun at his hip. "That's impossible. Miss James has been here every night since I brought her home." "You'd say that, wouldn't you?" One of the other men spoke up. Fiona recognized him now, Jacob Holloway, Amelia's son. "Everyone knows you've taken her as your woman." Fiona gasped at the crude implication, but Quinn remained dangerously calm. "Careful, Holloway, that's slander against a lady's reputation." Sheriff Morris raised a placating hand. "Look, Novak, we're just following up on a lead. If the woman's been here the whole time, then she's in the clear. But we'll need more than just your word." "He's not the only one who can vouch for Miss James," Martha declared, appearing in the doorway. Several ranch hands had also gathered, drawn by the commotion. "She's been here every day and night, helping me with the house. Any of the men can confirm it." Wilkins stepped forward. "That's right, Sheriff. Miss James hasn't left the ranch since she arrived." Sheriff Morris looked displeased but not surprised. "Well, that's that then, multiple witnesses." He replaced his hat. "Sorry to disturb your evening, Novak." As the men turned to leave, Jacob Holloway lingered, his gaze moving between Quinn and Fiona with undisguised contempt. "This isn't over, Novak. My mother hasn't forgotten what your family did." Quinn's expression hardened. "And I haven't forgotten what yours did to my brother. Get off my land, Holloway." After the riders departed, the tension in Quinn's shoulders remained. Fiona touched his arm gently. "What did he mean about your family?" Quinn's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "It's a long story. One I've never fully told anyone." "I'd like to hear it," Fiona said softly, "if you want to tell me." Inside, with the doors closed and the ranch hands returned to their duties, Quinn poured himself another whiskey. Martha brought coffee for Fiona, then tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone in the study. Quinn stood by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "My brother Caleb was in love with Elizabeth Holloway, Jacob's sister. They were planning to marry against her parents' wishes. The Holloways thought their daughter could do better than a rancher's son." Fiona listened intently, sensing the pain behind his measured words. 3 years ago, Caleb rode into Silvercrest to meet Elizabeth. They were planning to elope. But Jacob caught them together and accused Caleb of trying to ruin his sister's virtue. Quinn's knuckles whitened around his glass. "There was a fight. Jacob shot my brother in the street, claimed self-defense." "Oh, Quinn," Fiona whispered, her heart aching for him. Sheriff Morris ruled it justified, no charges filed. Quinn's voice was flat, emotionless. "Elizabeth was sent back east to relatives. Jacob Holloway walked free, and I buried my little brother." Now Fiona understood the darkness in Quinn, the reason for his isolation. "That's why you helped me," she realized. "Because the Holloways were behind my troubles too." Quinn turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "At first maybe, but that's not why I asked you to stay." The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning. Fiona rose from her chair and moved toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. She stopped when only inches separated them. "Why did you ask me to stay, Quinn?" His gaze searched hers, vulnerability mixing with the strength she'd come to associate with him. "Because for the first time since Caleb died, I've remembered what it feels like to care about someone's future besides my own." Fiona's heart swelled at his words. Slowly, hesitantly, she raised her hand to his face, her fingers lightly tracing the line of his jaw. Quinn remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. "I'd like to stay," she said softly. "Not as your housekeeper, not as a woman you're protecting, but as someone who might have a place in that future you're thinking about." Quinn's hand covered hers, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. "I can't offer you much beyond this ranch and a man who's forgotten how to be anything but hard. You offered me shelter when I had none," Fiona reminded him. "You believed in my innocence when no one else did." "That's more than most women ever find." Something shifted in Quinn's expression, a softening, a surrender. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, almost reverent, but deepened as Fiona responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathing unsteadily, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I should have asked permission first," he murmured. "You had it the moment you brought me home," Fiona admitted, surprising herself with her boldness. That night, Fiona lay in bed, her fingers touching her lips where Quinn's kiss still lingered. Everything had changed, yet nothing was settled. Quinn had walked her to her room, kissed her hand with old-fashioned courtesy, and bid her good night. No promises had been made, no declarations beyond the admission that they both wanted her to stay, but it was enough. For the first time in years, Fiona fell asleep with hope in her heart. The weeks that followed brought changes to the Novak ranch. Quinn, once so reserved and distant, began to open up more, not just to Fiona, but to his ranch hands and even visitors. He smiled more frequently, and occasionally Fiona would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Their courtship progressed with frontier directness. Quinn took Fiona riding across his land, showing her the boundaries of the property with pride. They ate meals together, talked by the fire in the evenings, and exchanged kisses that grew increasingly passionate. Yet Quinn never pressed for more, respecting Fiona's virtue with a gentleman's restraint that both frustrated and endeared him to her. One crisp November afternoon, Quinn found Fiona in the garden behind the house, harvesting the last of the root vegetables before winter set in fully. "Need a hand?" he offered, kneeling beside her in the dirt without waiting for an answer. Fiona smiled, handing him a basket. "For someone who employs a dozen ranch hands, you seem awfully eager to do garden work." "Maybe I just like the company," he replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in that half-smile she'd come to cherish. They worked side by side, the comfortable silence broken only by occasional comments about the vegetables or plans for the coming winter. As they finished, Quinn helped Fiona to her feet, but didn't release her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his expression suddenly serious. "About us." Fiona's heart skipped. "What about us?" "I'm not good with words, Fiona, never have been." He looked down at their joined hands. "But I know what I want. I want you here not as my employee or my guest, but as my wife." Though she'd begun to hope for this, the actual proposal took Fiona's breath away. "Quinn, before you answer," he interrupted, "you should know what you'd be getting. This ranch is my life. It's hard work, long days, and sometimes bitter disappointments. I can be stubborn and set in my ways. And I still carry anger about what happened to Caleb." Fiona squeezed his hand. "I know who you are, Quinn Novak. I've seen your hardness and your kindness. I've watched you with your men, with Martha, with the animals. You're a good man trying to do right in a hard world. Is that a yes?" He asked, a vulnerability in his eyes she rarely glimpsed. "Yes," Fiona answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll be your wife." The transformation in Quinn's face was remarkable, the tension easing, joy breaking through like sunshine after a storm. He pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of exuberance. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, unconcerned about who might see. "I love you, Fiona James," he said against her lips, the first time he'd spoken the words. "And I love you, Quinn Novak," she replied, her heart so full it might burst. They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher who stopped at the ranch on his circuit. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, attended by the ranch hands, Martha, and a few neighboring ranchers Quinn counted as friends. Fiona wore a new dress Quinn had ordered from Coopersville, and he stood tall in a clean black suit that Martha had pressed meticulously. Their vows were straightforward, frontier, practical but heartfelt. Quinn promised to protect and provide, Fiona promised to support and care. Both promised fidelity and love for as long as they both lived. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to Martha's eyes. The celebration afterward was lively, a feast prepared by Martha and Fiona, music from a fiddle played by one of the ranch hands, and dancing in the main room of the house with furniture pushed against the walls. Quinn surprised everyone, including his new wife, by being a capable dancer, guiding Fiona around the makeshift dance floor with unexpected grace. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Quinn led Fiona upstairs, not to her small room, but to the master bedroom she would now share with her husband. The room was large and simply furnished, dominated by a wide bed with a hand-carved headboard. "This was my parents' room," Quinn explained, a touch of nervousness in his voice. "I've had Martha air it out and make it ready, but if you'd prefer different furnishings or arrangements," Fiona silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect, Quinn." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other in the most intimate ways. Quinn was gentle and patient, guiding Fiona through her initial nervousness with tender care. In his arms, she found both passion and safety, a combination she hadn't known was possible. And Quinn, who had kept himself apart from others for so long, found in Fiona's embrace a homecoming he hadn't realized he was seeking. Winter descended on the Wyoming territory with a vengeance that year. Heavy snow blanketed the ranch by early December, turning the landscape into a pristine white expanse broken only by the dark shapes of buildings and fences. Life slowed but didn't stop. Cattle still needed tending, repairs still needed making, and the household still needed running. Fiona took to her role as ranch mistress with natural ease. She managed the household accounts, supervised Martha and the occasional additional help, and made the main house a true home. Quinn watched her flourish with pride and sometimes disbelief that this capable, beautiful woman had chosen to share his life. Their evenings were precious times spent together by the fire, reading from Quinn's surprisingly extensive library or simply talking. Quinn gradually shared more stories of his childhood and his brother, the pain of recounting them eased by Fiona's sympathetic understanding. In turn, she told him of her life before Silvercrest, of her parents and the dreams she'd once had. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted one snowy night as they sat before the fire, her head resting on his shoulder. "Before my parents died, I'd almost saved enough for teacher's college." Quinn's arm tightened around her. "You'd have made a fine teacher." "Perhaps," she said thoughtfully. "But life had other plans, and I can't regret the path that led me here to you." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Still, it's not too late. We could get books, materials. There are children on neighboring ranches who get little schooling." Fiona looked up at him, touched by his support. "You wouldn't mind?" Quinn chuckled. "Fiona, if you wanted to turn the barn into a schoolhouse, I'd help you build the desks myself." As winter deepened, their love grew stronger. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and moods. Quinn discovered that Fiona sang softly to herself when she thought no one was listening. Fiona learned that Quinn had a dry sense of humor that emerged most often when they were alone. They argued occasionally, Quinn's stubbornness meeting Fiona's determination, but always found their way back to each other, the reconciliations sweet and passionate. Christmas came, the first either had celebrated properly in years. Quinn surprised Fiona with a proper writing desk for the small room they'd set aside as her study, where she could plan lessons for the neighboring children. Fiona gave Quinn a pocket watch she'd secretly commissioned from a jeweler in Coopersville, with a miniature portrait of herself inside the cover. "So you'll always have me with you," she explained as he stared at the tiny painting. Quinn's voice was rough with emotion when he finally spoke. "It's perfect, like you." In January, a blizzard struck, confining everyone to their buildings for 3 days. When it finally cleared, Quinn and his men rode out to check on the cattle, finding several head lost despite their precautions. It was the reality of ranch life. Sometimes nature won, no matter how well you prepared. Quinn returned to the house exhausted and disheartened. Fiona drew him a hot bath, helped him undress, and washed away the day's hardships with gentle hands. That night, as they lay together in the darkness, she whispered the news she'd been saving for the right moment. "Quinn," she said softly, "I believe I'm carrying your child." He went completely still beside her, then abruptly sat up, lighting the bedside lamp to see her face. "A baby, you're sure?" Fiona nodded, suddenly nervous about his reaction. Martha suspects so too. It's early yet, but all the signs are there. Quinn's face transformed, wonder replacing fatigue. His hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Fiona asked, though his expression had already answered her question. In response, Quinn gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "Please doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Fiona, you've given me back things I thought were lost forever: happiness, purpose, family. A child is a miracle I never dared hope for." As winter gradually yielded to spring, Fiona's condition became more apparent. Quinn grew both more protective and more demonstrative in his affection, often resting his hand on her growing belly to feel the baby's movements. The ranch hands were delighted by the news, viewing it as a promise of continuity for the Novak legacy. Martha took charge of preparing for the baby's arrival, supervising the creation of a nursery adjacent to the master bedroom and instructing Fiona in all matters related to infant care. Quinn, meanwhile, threw himself into expanding the ranch operations, determined to build an even stronger legacy for his growing family. In late March, as the first green shoots began to appear across the range, unexpected visitors arrived at the ranch. Fiona was in the garden, planning the spring planting, when she heard horses approaching. Looking up, she recognized Sheriff Morris and Jacob Holloway among the riders. Quinn had seen them too, emerging from the barn to intercept the group before they reached Fiona. She hurried toward them anyway, unwilling to let Quinn face these men alone. "Novak," the sheriff greeted, his tone neutral. "Mrs. Novak," he added, acknowledging Fiona with a tip of his hat. "Sheriff," Quinn replied coldly, "I thought we settled our business months ago." "Not here on official business today," Morris said, dismounting. "Mr. Holloway has something to say to your wife." Quinn's posture remained tense as Jacob Holloway stepped forward. The man looked uncomfortable, his usual arrogance subdued. "Mrs. Novak," he began stiffly, "I've come to offer an apology. It seems there was a misunderstanding regarding the theft at our general store." "Misunderstanding," Quinn repeated, his voice dangerous. Sheriff Morris cleared his throat. "The actual culprit was caught in Coopersville last week, confessed to several thefts, including the one in Silvercrest." "And the witness who claimed to have seen me?" Fiona asked. Jacob shifted his weight. "A mistake. The description was similar but clearly not you." Quinn's hand moved to Fiona's back, a protective gesture. "So you've ridden all this way to admit you were wrong. Again." "My mother insisted," Jacob said, some of his old resentment seeping through. "She feels our family owes Mrs. Novak a public clearing of her name." Fiona studied the man who had caused so much pain not just to her, but to Quinn through his brother's death. "I accept your apology, Mr. Holloway, but I think we both know this doesn't erase the past." Jacob's eyes dropped to Fiona's obvious pregnancy, then flicked to Quinn. Something like resignation passed over his face. "No, it doesn't, but perhaps it can end the feud between our families. For the future," he added, with a meaningful glance at Fiona's belly. Quinn remained silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he extended his hand to Jacob. "For the future," he agreed, though his eyes remained hard. The handshake was brief, formal, but it represented something significant: not forgiveness exactly, but a willingness to move forward. After the visitors departed, Quinn pulled Fiona into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked, his hand protectively covering her belly. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Are you?" "That couldn't have been easy." Quinn's jaw worked for a moment. Caleb would have wanted peace. He was never one to hold grudges. He looked down at Fiona's pregnant form. "And our child deserves to grow up without the shadow of old hatreds." Fiona reached up to touch his face. "You're a good man, Quinn Novak, better than you give yourself credit for." As spring blossomed into summer, Fiona's time grew near. Quinn arranged for a midwife from Coopersville to stay at the ranch during her final month, taking no chances with the health of his wife and unborn child. Despite her advanced condition, Fiona remained active, supervising the household and even conducting informal lessons for 3 children from a neighboring ranch who rode over 3 times a week. Quinn found her one afternoon in her small classroom, reading to the children. He leaned against the doorframe, watching as she brought the story to life with different voices and expressive gestures. The children were entranced, and so was Quinn. This was a side of Fiona he treasured, her natural ability to nurture and inspire. When the lesson ended and the children had ridden home, Quinn approached Fiona as she tidied the room. "You're a natural teacher," he observed, helping her erase the small blackboard he'd installed. "It's rewarding," she admitted, "though I'll need to take a break once the baby arrives." "Only for as long as you want," Quinn assured her. "We can arrange help with the baby when you're ready to teach again." Fiona smiled gratefully. "Have I told you lately how much I love you, Quinn Novak?" He pulled her gently into his arms, mindful of her large belly between them. "Not since breakfast," he teased, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Well, I do, more each day." That night, Fiona woke with the first pains of labor. By morning, the entire ranch was on alert, men nervously pacing the yard while Martha and the midwife attended Fiona upstairs. Quinn had been banished from the bedroom after his anxious hovering had drawn a sharp rebuke from the midwife. "Pacing won't make it go any faster," Wilkins told him as Quinn wore a path in the porch boards. "I should be with her," Quinn muttered. "She needs me," Wilkins chuckled. "Right now, boss, she needs women who know what they're doing. Our job is to stay out of the way." The labor was long but uncomplicated. As the sun began to set, a lusty cry echoed through the house. Quinn froze mid-stride, his heart pounding as he stared at the closed bedroom door. Minutes that felt like hours passed before Martha appeared, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Quinn," she announced. "A strong, healthy boy, and Fiona's doing fine." Quinn's legs nearly buckled with relief. Martha stepped aside, allowing him to enter the bedroom. There, propped up against pillows, was Fiona, exhausted but radiant, cradling a small bundle in her arms. She looked up as Quinn approached, her smile so full of love it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Quinn sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the tiny red face peering out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, Quinn caught a glimpse of deep blue. "He's perfect," Quinn whispered, afraid to touch something so small and new. "Would you like to hold him?" Fiona asked, gingerly, as if handling the most fragile treasure. Quinn accepted his son into his arms. The weight was almost nothing, yet he felt the responsibility of it to his very core. The baby squirmed, then settled against his father's chest. "What shall we call him?" Fiona asked. Quinn looked from his son to his wife, overwhelmed by the love he felt for both. "Caleb," he said after a moment, "if that's all right with you." Tears welled in Fiona's eyes. "Caleb Novak, it's perfect." Quinn leaned forward to kiss her gently. "Thank you," he murmured against her lips. "For him, for everything." Young Caleb Novak thrived under the devoted care of his parents. By his first birthday, he was taking his first tentative steps across the ranch house floor, Quinn's strong hands ready to catch him if he stumbled. Fiona had resumed teaching by then, with Martha happily tending to Caleb during lesson times. The ranch prospered too. Quinn's careful management and strategic purchases of adjacent land had nearly doubled its size. He built a proper schoolhouse on the property, where Fiona now taught not just the neighboring children, but also the children of his ranch hands. Her reputation as an excellent teacher spread, and soon families from as far as 15 miles away were sending their children to the Novak Ranch for schooling. One evening, nearly 2 years after that stormy night when Quinn had found Fiona in his barn, they sat together on the porch swing, watching Caleb play with a wooden horse Quinn had carved for him. The boy was the image of his father, with the same serious expression when concentrating, though he had Fiona's gentle nature. "I received a letter today," Fiona said, leaning comfortably against Quinn's side. "From Silvercrest." Quinn tensed slightly. "What did it say?" "Mrs. Holloway has passed away," Fiona told him. Jacob has invited us to the funeral as a gesture of reconciliation. Quinn was quiet for a long moment, watching his son. Do you want to go? Fiona considered carefully before answering. I think we should. Not for Amelia Holloway's sake, but for Caleb's, both your brother and our son. To show that the past is truly behind us. Quinn nodded slowly. You're right. It's time to lay all those ghosts to rest. 3 days later, they rode into Silvercrest together, Quinn, Fiona, and little Caleb. It was Fiona's first time back since the night she'd been cast out, and the town had changed little. People stared as the Novak family made their way to the church, whispers following in their wake. The funeral was well attended, the Holloways being one of the prominent families in the area. Jacob, now the head of the family, acknowledged Quinn and Fiona with a solemn nod as they took seats near the back. After the service, as people gathered outside, he approached them, his expression neutral. Thank you for coming, he said formally. My mother would have appreciated the gesture. Quinn's face remained impassive, but his voice held no rancor. We came for the living, not the dead, Holloway. Jacob's eyes dropped to young Caleb, who was peering curiously at him from his father's arms. Your boy, our son, Fiona confirmed. Caleb. Something flickered in Jacob's eyes at the name recognition, perhaps even remorse. He has your look, Novak, he observed. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. I hope he grows up in more peaceful times than we did. Quinn shifted Caleb to his left arm and accepted Jacob's handshake with his right. No words were needed. The gesture said everything necessary about moving forward. As they prepared to leave town, Fiona noticed Quinn pausing in front of what had once been the general store where she'd worked. So much has changed since I last stood here, she remarked, taking his hand. For the better, Quinn said, glancing down at their son, though I never would have believed it that night, finding you half drowned in my barn. Fiona smiled, remembering. You took me home and told everyone I was yours. Rather presumptuous, don't you think? Quinn's eyes softened as he looked at her. I think some part of me knew even then that you were meant to be with me, that we were meant to be a family. Even though I was just a woman cast into the rain without shelter, she teased. Especially then, he replied, suddenly serious. Because in saving you, Fiona, I saved myself too. On the ride home, with Caleb sleeping peacefully in Fiona's arms, Quinn pointed out landmarks on their land. The ranch spread before them, bathed in golden afternoon light, a testament to hard work and perseverance. I've been thinking, Quinn said as they crested the final hill before the ranch house came into view, about expanding the schoolhouse, making it a proper school for the whole county. Fiona looked at him in surprise. That would be a significant undertaking. You're a significant teacher, he replied with a smile, and this land should stand for more than just cattle and horses. It should stand for future and hope. Quinn Novak, Fiona said, her heart swelling with love, when did you become such an optimist? He reached across to touch her cheek tenderly. When a bedraggled, beautiful woman stumbled into my barn one rainy night and changed everything. As they approached the ranch house, several ranch hands rode out to meet them, including Wilkins, who had news about a new foal born while they were away. Life on the ranch continued its eternal cycle: birth, growth, occasional hardship, and abundant joy. Later that evening, with Caleb tucked into his bed and the house quiet around them, Quinn and Fiona stood at their bedroom window, looking out at the star-filled Wyoming sky. Quinn's arms encircled Fiona from behind, his hands resting protectively over her stomach, where the first signs of their second child were just beginning to show. Are you happy, Fiona? He asked softly against her hair. With this life we've built. Fiona turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, no longer quite as hard as when she'd first met him, softened now by love and fatherhood. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she answered truthfully. Who would have thought that being cast out into a storm would lead me to the greatest shelter I could ever find, your heart? Quinn lowered his head to claim her lips in a kiss that held all the passion of new love and all the comfort of a love well established. Outside, the Wyoming wind sang around the sturdy house, but within, all was warmth and security, the promise made real on that rainy night when a determined cowboy had brought home a woman in need and declared, with more foresight than he knew, "She's mine."